In this demonstration, I'm going to create an OCI Generative AI Agent that can speak to a database, which is a feature that has recently launched in the service. Now, in order to do this, there are three key steps to be followed. Step 1 is to provision a key vault, and step 2 is to add a database connection. This is to allow the Generative AI Agent to be able to speak to the database. Once we've done that, we can then create the Generative AI Agent using a database connection that's been created. The purpose of the key vault is to ensure that the credentials are stored encrypted and that the application doesn't have access to it. Now, the database that we'll be using for this demonstration is a database table that contains information about a fleet of various different vehicles, including information on the make, model, the type of fuel that's used, the distance travelled, and the odometer reading. Now, for step 1, we need to provision a key vault in OCI to store the database credentials. These will laterally be used by the Generative AI Agent to connect to the database and perform database queries against it. So we'll go into the OCI console, into Identity and Security, and select Vault. And for the purposes of this, I'll provision a brand new vault. This will be created within the compartment named Gen AI Agent, and I'll give it the imaginative name of Vault. So we'll now go into the vault, select Master Encryption Key, and then select Create Key. I'll select Software as the protection mode because software keys are free, and I'll give it a name of Master Key. I'll then hit Create Key, which will then create the Master Encryption Key. In the real world, you may likely use a hardware encryption key, but for the purpose of this demonstration, software is sufficient. Now we've created the vault, the second step is to create a database connection. This will allow the Generative AI Agent to speak to the database in question, and we'll use the credentials that we will store within the key vault in order to do this. So we'll go to Developer Services, and then within Database Tools, select Connections. We'll then select Create Connection. From here, I give the connection a name. I'm going to give this exactly the same name as the database that I have created, which is ADW Demo. We'll select the database type. In my case, it's an autonomous database. We'll then select the compartment where the database is located. In this case, the compartment is Demo, which will then allow us to select the database in question. I then need to provide the username to access the database. I'm using the admin account to access it. I then need to create the password secret. So this is to store the administrator password. I'll give it a name of admin password so it's easy for me to recall. I'll then select the vault that we've just created within the Gen AI Agent compartment, and I'll also select the master key that will be used to encrypt the password. I'll then need to enter the password for the admin account on the autonomous database and then confirm that. Once that's been done, I can hit Create and the password secret has been created. The next step is to create the wallet content secret. So I will call this wallet secret. This is for the database connection information rather than the actual username and password. We'll then select the vault that we've previously created and the master encryption key. I'll select this setting which will automatically obtain the wallet, so I don't need to upload it manually. That contains information that is required to be able to get access to the autonomous database. Once that's been done, and we just verify all of the settings are correct, I can then hit Create. Once that's been created, we now have a database connection that the Generative AI Agent can then use to obtain access to the SQL database. And to check it works, we'll go to Actions and launch SQL CI. And what we should now see within a few seconds is a successful connection to the database, which verifies that the database connection and the vault have been created successfully. And there we go. We should hopefully in a second or two see that it's accessed. There we go. We've now got access to the database. What I'll then do is show you what the database actually looks like and verify the connection using a different method. So if we go to database actions, what I can do is select the compartment and the connection that we've just created, and then run SQL queries directly within a browser. So to do that, I'll select SQL. I'll then simply do a select star from the database table in question, which is fleet fuel consumption. Autocomplete to the rescue here, as I've mistyped it. And if I hit return there, we can now see a list of all of the vehicles stored within that database table. So again, another way of confirming that the database connection we've created works correctly. Now we've done that, the next step is the exciting piece where we get to create the actual generative AI agent itself. And in order to do this, what we'll do is go within the OCI console to Analytics and AI, Generative AI Agents. We select Agents from the left-hand side and then select Create Agent. I'll give the name Demo Agent to this Generative AI Agent. I'll leave all of the settings as default because I'm trying to keep this demo as simple as possible. We'll then select Create Tool, and as we're wanting to connect to a database, we'll select a SQL tool. We'll provide the SQL tool a name, which I'll call SQL2 to keep it nice and simple, and a description. We then need to provide the database schema so that it understands what columns are present within this specific database and tables too. So what I will do is just provide the command that was used to create the table initially, which contains a list of all of the columns and also the data types for each of those. I'll leave the other settings as default. We'll select the database connection to verify that it can actually get access to the database that contains that data. The next important thing for us to do is to enable SQL execution. This is disabled by default. If it's disabled, it will simply return the SQL query you could run against the database. If we configure it to enable, it'll actually run it against the database and then provide the response. And then lastly, we will provide the details of one of the database tables that has a slightly different name. We then get it to create the agent endpoint. Now, there are various options that we have now for guardrails, which I'll just demonstrate here. I'll not enable any of those. I'll keep those as all disabled for this specific demonstration, but they're, in a real world, very useful options to use to add some additional level of security to your agent. We then need to accept the Llama 3 license, as that's used under the hood within the Generative AI Agent service. The agent will now take some time to create. Once it's available, we can click into the demo agent that we have just created and then select Launch Chat. This enables us to test the Generative AI agent within the OCI console. In the real world, you'd likely have a front-end application that calls into the Generative AI Agent service, but this is a nice, quick, dirty way to do that. And the first question we'll ask is, what is the average MPG of the fleet of vehicles? This then shows a generated SQL query and the response that's come back. On the right-hand side, we can see a full trace that shows exactly what's happening under the hood with the Generative AI agent in terms of the SQL queries that is generated and how it is run those against the database and then provide the responses to the end user. This is really useful for troubleshooting if you're having any issues and also just to understand a little bit more about how the service actually works. We'll then fire another question. So what is the average distance travelled by a vehicle from the fleet? Again, this is going to query the database that we've hooked up. We can see here that the average distance is 7,345 miles. The data is a snapshot over a year period. And then lastly, we'll ask it how many vehicles there are within the fleet. And that will come back and give us a row count of 740. So we know that there are 740 vehicles available. Now that's it for the demonstration. Really appreciate you watching it. Thanks for your time.